Welcome to the Domestic Supply Chain Summit. I'm Thomas Wasson, and in this special fireside chat, we're going to be talking a little bit about not only the volatile environments of revolving tariffs, but reshoring. And so, super excited to be welcoming on Rosemary Coates. She's the executive director at the Reshoring Institute. So, we're going to dive in and find out. Rosemary, an absolute pleasure to have you on. It's great to get to catch up too.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad to be here and talk about the tariffs, our favorite topic, right?
The dreaded T word. And it's been a lot going on. So for folks who've been if I've been living under the proverbial rock, catch us up on kind of what are some of the big themes and current things that we're dealing with at the moment.
Well, of course, the biggest thing is China, the 145% tariff on China. We import so many goods. So I think $468 billion a year worth of Chinese goods. And it's not just consumer goods, of course, it's for all kinds of industrial products and parts and so forth. So, I mean, this is going to hurt in a big way. And pretty soon we're going to see some empty store shelves and prices going up. And, there's a lot of ramifications to what's going to happen. That's the biggest thing. Just this week, I think maybe Friday, there was I don't know, it's hard to keep up with all the dates. There was
recently
an additional tariff placed on auto parts. So not only automobiles, but auto parts coming into the U.S. have a 25% tariff now. So even if you're not going to buy a new car, if you have to have your car repaired, it's going to be more expensive because of the parts. So, I think we're looking at just our pocketbooks being hit as American consumers in multiple ways.
And it's a tough thing because there's so many moving parts, how, de minimis exception, how these items are declared.
Yeah.
And so when we're thinking about how do I handle 145% tariffs, what are my options if I have to ship stuff in? Because we're definitely a big, hungry importer of our nation. A lot comes from overseas.
Yeah, well, you don't have many options, really. I mean, if you've been sourcing from China and that's where you're buying goods from, you don't have any options. It's the country of origin, is the way that tariffs are placed. So, some people say, well, can't we transship through Singapore or somewhere else with a lower tariff rate? And you can, but it doesn't change the country of origin. So you still get the tariff applied to the country of origin, which would be China. The de minimis is really, that was $800, which is by comparison worldwide very high. So most countries around the world have this kind of exemption for small things coming in, gifts for grandma, that kind of thing, that can cross the border. But most of those limits in most countries around the world are about $50. So ours at $800 is exceptionally high and has been for quite some time. And that's allowed all these inexpensive goods to be bought by Americans and brought in essentially duty free. And they just passed right through customs. There was no formal entry process or anything else. And that was put in place because there was so much e-commerce going on in the early 2000s. We were all buying Halloween costumes for our kids and Christmas decorations and, fast fashion apparel and things that were less than $800. And so this facilitated those kind of imports. That's now gone. So even things you might buy through Temu or Amazon, that's coming from overseas, probably China, are going to be at least 145% more expensive.
And when we're thinking about that, I'm assuming 145%. If I had like $10, it's going to be worth like what, $20 or $24.50. So that's literally like when we're thinking of the value, it's almost plus doubling it by 1.5 times.
Yeah, right. That 1.45 times. Yes, exactly. Exactly. Now, some companies, we just did a big survey at a big research project, actually, at the Reshoring Institute. We interviewed 18 senior executives, CEO level, across the country in all regions. And we asked them some fairly simple questions like, what are you going to do about the tariffs? And almost to a person, they said, they were either going to try to absorb some of it, but most of it would be passed on to consumers. So even industrial goods or any kind of products that are final assembled here, you're still going to see these huge price increases because the parts coming in are that much more expensive. And then the other concerning part of that research was almost everyone, I think, with the exception of one, of these executives, these were all C-level executives, said that they were not doing anything, that they were frozen and they were not going to hire. They were not going to invest in new production facilities. They weren't going to invest in new equipment, nothing until the economy stabilizes. So that's kind of scary. I mean, that's a big red flag for a recession.
So everyone's holding their breath.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just because, there's so much instability. I think if things calm down a little bit and we have a clearer picture of exactly what's going on, exactly what the tariffs are going to be, then we'll start to see some movement again. But for right now, in the next period, maybe a couple of months until the 90-day pause is over. Trump had put a 90-day pause on most of the tariffs. Until that's over, companies are not going to move forward. They're just in a holding pattern right now.
That was one of my questions was, if China got the worst of it so far, we have this pause and then these other tariffs go into effect. If I'm holding my breath, do I need to exhale a little bit if I see better, favorable trade deals? Is it more of waiting to see a trade deal, or is it more of waiting to see if a trade deal with China, which is right now looking to be the worst of it?
No, I'd say across the board. There's a lot of production all across Asia. Vietnam, for example, Thailand has a lot of high-tech production. Taiwan, certainly, all of these countries are producing a lot of electronics and things that we don't think about necessarily, but we use every day, right? I mean, your cell phone and your blender and your hair dryer and all those things are essentially made in China or across Asia somewhere. So, I think if there is a trade deal that's negotiated and put in place, then it'll start to help people move forward, particularly with Mexico. And I say that because at the Reshoring Institute, it's our thing to try to help bring manufacturing back, but I just don't see a lot of it happening right now or ever in some cases. So a lot of like low cost items that require a lot of labor, that stuff's never coming back. We're not going to put 10,000 people to work sitting on plastic benches at sewing machines all day long. I mean, that's not the kind of American workers that we have. But what we do see is a lot of movement out of China and into Mexico. So the sooner we get a trade deal with Mexico, I think the better. That'll create quite a big step forward in stability. And then, of course, the USMCA free trade agreement between Mexico, the US, and Canada is already in place, and it is not affected by the tariffs. So if you can qualify for producing something in Mexico that's the origin and the labor of Mexico, Mexican content that qualifies under USMCA, you can still bring it in duty free.
One of my questions was, would Mexico and possibly Canada to an extent be a form of a pressure release valve? Because we'd seen since the first Trump administration and the earliest rounds of levies and tariffs that the supply chain was gradually shifting towards Mexico. And that was one of the big stories over the past few years with supply chains.
Absolutely. And I think that's true. I mean, we've seen a steady stream at the Reshoring Institute. We've been around 11 years. So we've been helping companies rethink their global supply chains for a long time. And we have seen over the past, I think since the pandemic, a pretty steady movement from companies that are interested in moving out of China and still to a low-cost environment. In fact, Mexico has some of the cheapest labor in the world, even cheaper than China. China's labor rates have gone up in the past few years. So you can find some really great production, and they have, pretty decent facilities and movement and so forth in Mexico. So I think, it's a pretty good option for a lot of companies.
And if I'm thinking like I'm China, I'm moving some production into Mexico, I've got Vietnam as a location. As we're seeing the supply chain search for the value and the lower cost for some of these items that we can't get American labor for, do you think other Central American, Latin American countries, or is it when I'm making these big capex decisions, is it kind of like the big three, the China, maybe a Canada, Vietnam, or something like that? Is there going to be some more opportunities as some of these trade deals get made and China's looking for ways to still get stuff going?
Yeah, it's funny you asked that because I was just talking to someone yesterday about Central America as an option. And there's quite a bit of apparel production that's going on in Central America right now. It's kind of a growth area for apparel. So that's certainly an option. And I think there's some pretty good facilities there. I mean, there's some automotive coming out of places like Costa Rica. There's some medical devices and consumables that are coming out of some of the Central American countries and Dominican Republic. I mean, there's some options, and we help our clients talk through those options and try to determine where's the best place for them. But yeah, I think that's an option, especially if we cut a trade deal with them. So it's a wait and see if those trade deals get put in place. So far, there hasn't been any, but I suspect there will be some forthcoming fairly soon.
And looking at items across the domestic supply chain most at risk for the current tariffs, and then we can talk about maybe what the best opportunities for reshoring are. But for the biggest tariff risk, I'm a CEO, I'm holding my breath. How long until my face turns purple and I have to make a decision? And what are kind of the items that consumers need to worry about? I know toilet paper is 80% made in the US, so I'm not going to buy toilet paper.
Yeah, right. There you go. Yeah, there's a lot made in China too. Well, so in talking to these executives, what we also noted is that almost all of them have some plans in the works. So, we always encourage our clients also to have a plan A, plan B, plan C, depending on what could happen. It's not just the tariffs. I mean, you need to have alternate plans in place in case there's a hurricane or a tornado or a fire that burns down the factory or a war in Ukraine, something like that. So you always have to have alternates in place. And most of these executives told us that's exactly what they've done, is they have a couple of alternates that they're working on so that when they feel comfortable about moving forward, they'll have some plans they can execute.
And thinking of the reshoring, one last question as well. Are we going to see maybe what would the nature be? The goal with these tariffs is to bring manufacturing back, but is it going to be? You mentioned earlier we can't really make lawn chairs. We don't have the labor force for that. You can't compete on cost and wages. Are we talking like highly automated factories, 3D printing items? When we're thinking of reshoring and bringing stuff back, what are kind of the biggest themes of the things that our labor force and population would possibly do a good job at?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. You hit the nail on the head. I mean, what we really want to have come back and what the Reshoring Institute is focused on is much more highly automated kind of production and that extracts labor because we don't have those workers that are going to sit on the plastic benches for 10 hours a day and assemble things. We just don't. That's not our workforce. And the other thing is, if we don't pay a living wage, so this is really important. If we don't pay a living wage, then we have to supplement those laborers with welfare. And we don't want to create a welfare state. That's not the right thing to do. So what we want is production that is more sophisticated, more automated, requires higher skill levels, and pays better. So we want those jobs back that are going to pay, $70,000 or $80,000 a year for a production worker that's running a robot, for example. So that's the kind of production we want back, and that fits the economic profile of our future, not the 23 cents an hour t-shirt production. That's not going to work here.
Yeah, and I'm thinking as well, it's like a farmer's market revitalization. You bring back the 80,000 year job, it may support 2 or 3 smaller local crafters or other things. There's other ways of getting these items. It's just you have to bring in that income first, and then maybe it'll have that second and third
Sure.
order effect.
Yeah, one of the other things that executives told us is they were trying to encourage their purchasing departments to buy local, to buy domestic items. But those domestic producers are also buying from China, right? So they're buying parts from China for their production that's sold to these other companies. So this is a process. I mean, I'm very optimistic that manufacturing will be revitalized and we'll see it increase over the next few years. But, I think it's going to be 3 to 5 years before we start seeing anything significant.
No pressure at all. Rosemary, thank you so much for joining us and talking about it. A lot of great information. If folks want to learn more about the Reshoring Institute, get in touch, share their info. What's the best way to learn more?
Yeah, well, come to our website. It's reshoringinstitute.org. We're nonprofit and nonpartisan, and we do lots and lots of research. We publish everything. We have surveys and case studies and all kinds of interesting statistics. So if you go to reshoringinstitute.org, you can download all this stuff. It's all free. We don't make you sign up for anything. You can just download it. And make good use of it. We think it's a public service, and we're trying to help companies actually rethink their global manufacturing.
Perfect. Knowledge is power. Rosemary, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate catching up.
All right. Thank you.
That's going to be a wrap for this segment, but we have a lot more great stuff coming up in this domestic supply chain summit. A lot more fireside chats as well, so stay tuned.